Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Now, I've tried every single trinket available for healers in the War Within beta, and I wanted to give you some of my impressions of all of them thus far. Starting off, I want to talk about the healer damage trinket, because this one is just wicked cool. It's called the Bursting Lightshard, and what it is like a kamikaze light spawn that you place down, and it AoEs enemies around you, while also sacrificing its own health in the process. The cool thing about it is that you can actually heal it more to make sure it gets more bursts off. I didn't actually track how many bursts you can get at maximum, but eventually it will just time out. I think it's like 10 seconds or 15 seconds worth of bursting that you have on hand. But I thought this was a really fun trinket to play with because you know how much of its life that you're going to give up every single time. It's always going to be 1/3. So what I did is I just started slamming it down, targeting it, and casting some extra heals into it, and just making sure it was above 33% HP every time, and it added a ridiculous amount of damage. If you haven't tried this already, please give it a shot on beta so far. It's super cool. I think it's also really the ideal for like how damage trinkets should work for healers. Like if you're adding a bit of damage into the equation, or adding a bit of healing into that target, and sacrificing healing for your group or healing uptime for your group, you get rewarded with damage. I think that's fantastic, and I hope that this trinket ends up being really strong whenever it is added into the season. The experiment trinket, this one was really odd. This is like the galactic something or other. Basically, you get primary stat, and your heals are then placing a special buff onto your allies in the process. And it kind of varies depending on the specializations. The way I found it was that it was giving thorns to the tank, so when the tank was taking damage, it was causing the effect to deal damage back at those enemies. I was also buffing players with primary stat, and then I was also buffing, I think it was a hunter, with just causing their attacks to deal extra damage. It wasn't really showing on the meters itself. I couldn't actually find it in any of the meters that I was doing of how much damage I was actually providing into the equation, but it was kind of interesting to see that there was some decent uptime at least. So I'm hoping that this trinket gets kind of buffed as kind of a support trinket that you can have on hand. There's already like potions that you can throw down at a stacked pile to like buff everybody's primary stat. So this would be kind of a neat one to sort of buff the rest of your team in the process. So hopefully it'll be good. The next two trinkets I was playing with, one of them was the Gruesome Syringe. This has some like pretty decent healing. You were sort of like storing up this healing and spending it on your allies later on. It was like 2 or 3% healing, but it also was giving you primary stat buff in the process. And I think I had like 30 or 40% uptime on this intellect buff. So I don't really know why it was doing much of any healing if it's going to be like so low, but the intellect uptime I got out of it was really strong. So I love that one. The other trinket that I was doing in this pairing was Mereldars Toll. This is ringing this like massive annoying bell over an enemy, and whichever of your allies are attacking that marked target are actually giving versatility to your allies. So this was a really cool trinket to be able to utilize, because you could sort of like mark where everybody should attack basically, and then they would get versatility in the process. It was a really cool way of like being able to noticeably like buff your allies and also not really like lose out on some stats yourself. Here we get into some weirder trinkets. The carved Blazikon Wax trinket is giving you this versatility buff and spawning a candle. And this candle is one of these things where you need to like stand next to the candle to be able to get an enhanced buff. I think it was really small though. It was like a 5% extra versatility stat that you were getting. And it was like a massive buff of verse that you were getting just pretty regularly. So not too much pressure to be standing near the candle. And the uptime of it was like 35% or so. But the issue at hand was that the candle looks exactly like the candles that you're going to see in like the Dark Flame Cleft. It looks exactly the same. It is the exact same candle. So if you ever like run with this trinket in the dungeon which drops that trinket, it's really difficult to tell which is the trinket and which is actually just, you know, like environmental art, basically. It was very difficult to be able to see. If you're ever like standing on mobs, it's going to be impossible to see it underneath their feet, and there's this like very faint glow that sort of shows around it in like the areas where you can stand to still receive the buff. But boy, is it really small on hand. This is a super goofy trinket. Thankfully, the like extra bonus for standing near the candle is not that high, But gosh, I wish it would just like put the candle on your head or something along those lines, and just like make it so that you're buffing people around you instead of trying to make sure you're standing near some candle for max value. Really super weird. The like cousin, or I guess the evil twin to it though, is the Remnant of Darkness. This one is really cool because it's giving you a flat passive primary stat buff, and then when you reach enough stacks, you actually transform into like the darkness boss basically, and you erupt with extra damage. The damage is like maybe like 1% of your overall or 0.5% of your overall. It's not much, but it's really cool just being able to see your character turn into like the darkness and get like the full empowerment buff on hand. I'm a big fan of trinkets that just change your appearance that way, and I do like that you're actually getting some like passive constant intellect buff, even if it's not going to be full strength. We'll see how some of the tuning is going to go, because I imagine a number of these are going to get a ridiculous amount of changes to them. This one is super fun though. This is the Harvester's Edict, okay? It summons a like kamikaze blood worker murloc looking dude, and he like bum rushes your target. And so a lot of times he spawns to like my side or even behind me. And with this trinket, if you let it run into the target, it explodes and deals damage. It just like runs in strapped with bombs, it just blows up. But if you let it run into you, it gives you mastery. Now, obviously for a healer, most healers don't really care that much about mastery in a dungeon environment, so I don't love the stat bonus that you're giving on hand. I tried to get some of my buddies to run into it, and I don't think they even saw it, and there are even times it like ran through my allies as well, so I don't think you can give mastery to other people, unfortunately. But there are some funny moments where like we're in a hallway and it can't help but blow up on me. And so even if this one was like tuned really highly, you might have to like worry about how you want to play around it to make sure you're getting the proper damage value. And the blood worker mob is actually the exact same mob that you're going to see in some of the dungeons. So once again, just like the candle problem in the Dark Flame Cleft, it looks exactly like the other stuff, so you don't know if you're like walking towards a mob that's going to explode and give you mastery instead of damage, or if it's just one of the mobs in the dungeon. Kind of weird. There is a new sort of incarnate icon or ominous chromatic essence type buff that you're getting in the new expansion. It's called Signet of the Priory. This buff is giving you your highest secondary stat. I think it's on a 2-minute cooldown, and everybody else who has a Signet is also receiving that stat at a diminished effect when you pop your trinket. So if your highest secondary is haste, you pop that trinket, it gives you haste, and you're also giving haste to anybody that is also holding on to the Signet. So I think this one's pretty cool. The challenge though is you want to be able to find all the people who are also running this on use stat buff, as opposed to incarnate icon or chromatic essence, which are flat, constant, consistent stats that you like to have instead. That's kind of the weird thing. I don't know if this was like, if this is really high budget and you're running with like cooldown aligning comps that would like play with an Aug Evoker. Like if you were having like Shadow Priest, Mage, Aug Evoker on hand, you could run the Signet and everybody could run the Signet and everyone's kind of juicing each other up in a dungeon environment at the same time. This one could be pretty cool. Just a matter of that actually happening. Also, I don't think that the Priory is going to be in the M+ pool for Season 1, so this might be something that kind of has to wait until Season 2 to properly really like figure out and experiment, but it'll probably be a pretty good trinket from like a Mythic 0 level as we're gearing up. One trinket that's going to be ridiculous and is super insane right now is called the Sigil of Algari Concordance. And basically it says, hey, you know, you want to have an earthen bro come to your aid? Now, a lot of these trinkets over the years have been terrible, like they do nothing, right? This one, it got like cranked to 11 though. The earthen aid, the earthen NPC that comes to help you, does a ridiculous amount of healing. It just hard carries. Like if it's not changed and like M+ comes out soon and you're like having trouble healing some dungeons, just run this trinket. It'll take care of you. I never had to worry about anybody's life. I never had to worry about anybody's survivability. The earthen just sort of like, it gives you this buff called like fill in the cracks. And it was just like topping everybody. It was like my top heal, out-healed all of my abilities. It was just ridiculously strong. I think it also gave a little bit of intellect when it procced, or it gave a secondary buff when it procced, but I didn't really notice that because I think the uptime was like super insanely low. But this trinket was really insane. It's going to be sad to see when it gets nerfed into the ground. This next trinket is possibly the cutest and most fascinating one that I've seen thus far. It's the Ara Kara Sacbrood. And so what happens is you actually are like hatching eggs on your character's body. And each egg that you have gives you an intellect buff. They only last, I want to say they last like for a minute. And so you might have like 2 or 3 stacks, but that first stack started, 30 seconds ago. And so it doesn't refresh the duration when you get an additional stack. So the uptime is really high, but eventually those stacks are going to be hatching at some point. And so what happens is the egg actually hatches on your body. And I had the, the crab mode on, the arachnophobia mode on. And so the egg hatches and there's like a little baby crab that like bursts forth, which then gives you a buff, which like deploys the spiders. And so once you've like deployed the spider, the next enemy that you attack, the spider then deploys and like starts attacking it. It didn't really deal much damage. It was like 0.6% of my overall damage at the end of the dungeon, but it was a really cool like flavor that you got to add on into the equation. It's like a very, very fine detail that I'm surprised that they even added to begin with, but it was a pretty cool trinket to be able to add into for what is basically a spider expansion, right? Another really powerful trinket was the Viscous Coaglam. This one might be one of the most insane like designs. As long as the tuning's gonna be good, this could be like the most OP trinket out there, where overheal, they call it excessive healing, but overheal on allies is stored. And the cap's not that high, but it doesn't really need to be, because whenever somebody takes any sort of damage, that overheal is then deployed onto your allies. And so if you ever think of the old trinket, I think it's called Highfather's Machination, which was like a Legion era trinket where you would apply buffs to your allies, and when they dropped low, it would like instantly fill their bars. This one's more insane because you don't need to actually have them drop to a certain health threshold at all. They take damage, they get healed. They take damage, they get healed over and over and over again. The on use ability kind of deploys the overheal on yourself and puts a shield onto somebody. So when I was playing Holy Priest, I have binding heals, which is putting in a lot of output. I have native 5% leech as well. And so I can actually get a decent amount of extra absorb, even though the cap is really low. And the cap doesn't generate whenever you're out of combat. So you can't just like mash healing into yourself before a pull and then be able to juice up a shield. It's only the overhealing in combat. That being said, it was okay to be able to deploy like a, 5% of max life shield onto an ally every once in a while, but not really that useful overall. I think in general, this trinket was doing a really good amount of healing, and the healing that it was doing was ridiculously efficient. So if the cap gets raised a little bit more, in a world where healers can push up health pools super fast, having something that stores overheal and then cranks out a ton of output on its own could be really ridiculously insane. So definitely try this one out if you haven't already. Next up, the Entropoc Skardyn core. This one is launching like a fragment that you need to be able to pick up. There's been a million different versions of this kind of trinket. Blizzard loves these for some reason. In a very purpley focused expansion, you need to go find the purpley orb. And hey, it looks exactly like some purple orbs on some other boss fights throughout some of the spider dungeons. So good luck finding it. Yeah, I mean, just one of those like meh events where if you want the buff, you have to go like run after it and find it. And most people just don't ever opt to do that kind of thing. So kind of a stinker on this one. One of my favorite trinkets, or I think it would possibly be my favorite, is the Creeping Coagulum. This is an on use on a 1.5 minute cooldown, and you have to feed the coagulum. So it actually takes the healing that you would put into your allies, 20% of it, redirects it to the coagulum itself, and then once you feed it enough, then it explodes and bursts for healing. And so basically, if everybody was taking damage, or you know that damage is about to happen, you pop it, you start healing a little bit, and then as the big damage goes out, you really start cranking output into your allies, and then part of that healing feeds the coagulum. It bursts and heals everybody, or it should. At the moment, it was healing for like 0, but this is kind of like a weirder version of like the moat trinket that we had in Halls of Infusion, where you just like hit the button and you burst for healing. It's a bit more like work, but hopefully it's actually tuned to be stronger. I would love to have a trinket like this going into the next expansion for situations. I don't want to have healer trinkets that do healing that I always run no matter what, but having the option to run it when things are going wrong or when there's like extra burst damage and I need another resource are always really good to have. So I'm hoping that this Coagulum trinket gets to be strong enough that you would actually end up using it in one of the seasons. The Empowering Crystal of Anubikkaj was basically just giving you a secondary stat buff, int secondary stat. We've seen these before. It's had like 35% uptime, so if the tuning is going to be pretty good, you'd probably run something like this pretty regularly. So it's nice that, hey, you're going to get some stat stick options on hand. So like this one, pretty basic though. I'm pretty sure this trinket's really OP. It's called Ovinaxs Mercurial Egg. And so when you are standing still, you gain primary stat. And then when you're moving, that primary stat buff diminishes, and then you are gaining your highest secondary stat. So if all you were doing, for example, was just moving like crazy, then you would just gain your highest secondary. And then whenever you stand still, that secondary erodes and you start gaining primary stat. Every 2 minutes, you can suspend the incubation state. So if you are max stacks on your primary stat, you can activate the trinket and then start moving a bunch and not losing your primary stat buff in the process. As a Disc Priest, this one's pretty sick because you could kind of just guarantee you have max stacks every single time for every single ramp that you would possibly be doing. So big fan of this one. I kind of wish there was some sort of incentive to like want to sit on that like secondary stat. And I don't know, in my crazy mind, like, oh, I really want to have all this haste as I'm like applying my atonements and then switch it over to primary stat when I'm damaging or something. But I still think this one's really cool. I saw a lot of people running with this one. I also was seeing a lot of people running with the Scrapsingers Symphony. This one is a pretty basic trinket. Basically, your heals will make shields on your allies. And shields are really efficient, and they're really good. And burst damage, you know the rest. This one was just a strong trinket that you're going to be able to have on hand. I never really saw much of any damage coming out. It was only like dungeons that specifically dealt fire damage to cause the shields to like explode for damage, but at the moment the tooltip is like really low, but the output is actually quite nice. Next up is the Aberrant Spellforge, where it is empowering one of your abilities to do bonus damage. And so naturally I saw this for Disc Priest and I said, oh man, more damage for Smite, let's go. And it does not increase atonement output. The extra damage that it does is actually its own thing. It's trinket damage, and trinket damage does not convert into atonement healing, unfortunately. So this one just kind of goes into the bin, especially because I assume it's not going to be dealing much of any damage. It wasn't really adding up to much through any of the dungeons that I was running. So, unfortunate. What is fortunate is the Munch trinket, as I call it, the Mad Queen's Mandate. This one was pretty fun. You have a cast time to it, and you like munch your enemy, dealing like 2 mil damage into it, and then you gain like a 2-second hot. The healing that it does is like really minor, but if you time it correctly and you munch an enemy as it's about to die, then it actually halves the cooldown of the ability, and so you can start munching some more. I'd love for a trinket like this to be really good, but there's no real like secondary effect. It's just like pure damage, it felt like. So, not too great, unfortunately. Cool idea though. Every season I always get asked what like the ramping trinket is gonna be for Disc Priests, and notably in like season 4 we were kind of not getting great options, but I think I found it for next season. It's called the Spymasters Web. So every 6 seconds your damaging spells are dispatching a spider to spy on your foes. I noticed that it also did work off of dots. So I like wasn't casting, I was like hands off the keyboard, and it was working off the Purge the Wickeds I was casting. But every 6 seconds, your damaging spells will give you a stack of passive primary stat. And so obviously it takes a decent amount of time to be able to reach the maximum of 40 stacks. But when I was experimenting with it, I was realizing that I was getting to around 15 stacks or so every minute and a half. And so being able to activate the trinket, because it's only like a 20-second cooldown where you can cash in these stacks of passive intellect, cash them in and get a burst of intellect, and you get it for, I believe, 20 seconds on hand. This one was really cool because you don't have to reach max stacks. You basically would just cash it in every minute and a half as disc when you're using your ramp. And then you were getting around a 24-25% intellect boost, like compared to your maximum intellect. I think I have like 45,000 max intellect, and I was getting almost 12,000 intellect every minute and a half for like 20 seconds. So this one really felt like You could pair it up with Evangelism very easily and just blast output all the time. It felt very, very fun to be able to play with, and super heavily synergized with what you already wanted to do. You didn't have to worry about reaching max stacks. You would get passive primary stat just naturally building up, but you really wanted the biggest burst possible for your Evangelism cooldown, and I think this trinket is it. One of the trinkets that could be it is called Burin of the Candle King, and it is marking a target and it's absorbing half of the damage they take up to a cap, and the cap is supposed to be like 1.8 million or so, and it did like 5 absorb. I kid you not. Like, you can even see that when you carve a figurine of like your ally, it actually makes a wax statue of your ally next to your character. And then when they reach the cap, it actually melts. And so you can kind of see, you're like, oh, it melts. And then it just kind of goes away. This one, the number was set to like 100 or something like that. Like, they took a little whiff of air and then it melted, right? So if this actually has a decent size to it, this could be a crazy good like survivability trinket that you could utilize pretty early in like the M+ setup. I think the cooldown is 1.5 minutes, so it's actually not going to be too bad. I mean, we were having, I want to say 1.5 minutes cooldown. No, I guess it was 1 minute out of the versatility absorb that we're getting from Everbloom, like the leaf trinket, right? So yeah, you know, some kind of mitigation for the incoming damage to be able to help other people survive if it's actually tuned properly. This is a really cool way to do it. So you're still taking some damage, but you're still absorbing a decent amount. This one, I don't really think was a healer trinket, but it was kind of lumped in with it. The High Speaker's Accretion. And this one is doing damage, of course, and it's like a radius you have to put down. So you'd probably use like a cursor macro to be able to utilize this. You place down the circle, drop the Nova onto the targets, bursts for some damage. Based off how many targets you hit, it then returns intellect to you. This one seemed pretty mid. It seemed more budgeted towards damage than it was towards that like intellect gain. And maybe it was just because it didn't seem like the stacks for hitting multiple enemies was really cashing in properly. But I do think the budget for this one is more toward a damage trinket than actually a healer trinket. These next ones are some world drops. I don't think you're really going to use these at high level, but there's been exceptions, like the Divine Bell. If you were a Boomkin player or a Dispriest player in Shadowlands, it's happened before. This one is called the Concoction Kiss of Death. And basically you poison yourself, increase all your secondary stats, and then you need to be able to hit the antidote. So you use the trinket once, you poison yourself, increasing your stats, and then you need to hit the button again to dispel yourself of the poison. And if you don't, then it actually stuns you. And it's like 5.5 second stun. It's really, really long and annoying. So I tried to tempt fate and see if it would actually kill me, because the flavor text alleges that it can kill you, but nothing ever happened. So maybe it's gonna like 1 in 100 or something like that. At times it'll kill you, but at least, you know, so far you might have to try it for yourself to see if the flavor text is actually being for real. The Fungal Friend Flute is another one that kind of just does a bit of everything. It does damage, it does healing, and it returns mana to you. At the moment, Details was just not showing me mana return at all for some strange reason, so I couldn't see how much mana it was doing, but it was a couple percentage of healing, couple percentage of damage. Seemed like just a good, decent budgeted trinket to be able to get if you were like running around and questing, but I don't think it's going to scale high enough to really make good use out of. And the last one I tried was the Everburning Lantern, where you are picking up like these fireflies, or you're picking up light, it attracts fireflies, and the fireflies do some damage. This one also just didn't really have any sort of damage budget attached to it when I was testing, and so it was also quite a bit of a letdown. But let me know what you guys think. If you are looking for some trinkets to be able to try along the way, the Coagulum, if it ever gets fixed, would probably be like top on my list. See if it could help like bounce back. That Viscous Coaglam, I think, is going to be huge. The Sigil of Algari Concordance is probably going to get nerfed with that, I think it's Bright Leaf or Bright Shard helper that you get from the Earthen. Was super insanely fun and like awesome to see how much it could carry. But of course, it's very likely to get nerfed quite soon. Let me know what you guys think of the trinkets so far for the incoming expansion, and huge thank you to our patrons who make all of this content possible. Make sure to subscribe as well if you're interested in more of the War Within beta coverage for healers. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch y'all next time.